Welcome to a whole new set of Air Miners events. My name is Jason Grillo with Air Miners, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our event today on biomass and MRV. Wanted to just pause for a second and talk about why we have Air Miners events, why Air Miners exists. You know, last year the organizing team and we sat down and thought about what our mission is in Air Miners, really honed in on what makes us tick. What we arrived at, and this is something that I hope is shared by people in the room, is we're on a journey to, as it were, remove a cumulative gigaton of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by the end of 2030. That's Air Miners' mission statement. And all the other activities in Air Miners kind of fall out from that, like our Launchpad program, like our Slack community, like our events, like our Boot Up program. Today, we're going to talk about terrestrial biomass and monitoring and verifying and reporting on some of the methods that speak to that particular way of getting us to that cumulative gigaton of carbon dioxide equivalent removed from the atmosphere by 2030, knowing that this is the underpinning of much of what we do. The way we're going to work this is I'll give up the floor to our panelists for the better part of 35 or 40 minutes. We'll have Q&A starting about 40 or 45 minutes in, and then we'll conclude at the top of the hour. I'll stop the Zoom recording and can stay here for some networking in the same Zoom meeting afterwards. I'm looking forward to all this because this is what makes our community tick. This is what a way we see as a way of getting people to know each other, not just know of each other, if that makes sense. So with that, I just want to say thank you again, and hope to see you at more Air Miners events. Please do tell more people about Air Miners as you go, because that's our way of getting us to that cumulative gigaton removed, to get more people into our community, to get more people into the carbon removal journey. So with that, I'm going to give the floor to Monica to take us away for our meeting today. Monica.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason, for the introduction this together. It's for me to kick off this this panel and moderate. So I will just ask our wonderful panelists to give an introduction about themselves and their organization, and tell us how MRV is relevant for your organizations. Can you hear me well?
Panelists, feel free to unmute yourselves. Go ahead.
Cheers, Monica. I'll lead. I'm Freddie, CEO and co-founder of Planboo. We've been working in the biochar space for a couple of years now. MRV, super important because it builds trust and transparency with the buyers of the carbon credits. But it's also a great way to maintain a constant connection with our projects so that they are involved in understanding the process of what they're doing, keep them informed in relation to updates and information about the project. So yeah, MRV is a big part of what we do.
Hey everybody. Oh, go ahead, Priya.
Cool, thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Priya, currently located in Sri Lanka. Freddie is as well. And I'm COO and also co-founder of Planboo. I have a background in international development. I completed my Master of Science in Environment and Sustainable Development. And I have a passion for surfing. I love being close to nature. And together here with my friend Freddie and the team at Planboo, we're on a mission basically to remove carbon and protect our Earth home as best as we can. And looking forward to your questions and growing the CDR community. So I'll hand over to Maddie.
Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm labeled as Gold Room here. Nothing to do with Gold Standard, but everything to do with the fact that I'm not actually sure how to change my name on our conference room. So I'm Maddie. I'm CEO and co-founder of Living Carbon, located here in the beautiful Hayward, California. We're a synthetic biology company that engineers plants to capture and store more carbon. And MRV for us is absolutely critical. It's how high quality carbon projects can differentiate themselves, specifically in the nature-based space, from projects that either you can't play out the counterfactual or you have a questionable baseline being used. So we've developed photosynthesis enhanced trees that grow faster and also are resilient to drought, and we specifically focus on planting trees in land where trees otherwise wouldn't be thriving. So we're talking about degraded mine lands or any of the 75% of the land that humans have degraded in the United States. To us, MRV is exceptionally critical, especially as we think about the other products that we have in our pipeline. We work on metal hyperaccumulation seedlings, as well as some early stage work in algae. And the MRV for both of those projects just gets exceptionally more, not complex, but not able to use the status quo methodologies and registries. So I'm very interested to learn from the other panelists today about the direction they think the MRV for nature-based solutions or biomass-based solutions is headed.
Great. My name is Silva. I'm a remote sensing scientist at Pachama. Pachama is a startup that's really focused on trying to restore nature to help solve climate change. And what that really means is that we're trying to bring satellite observations to crediting for forest carbon, above ground forest carbon. What I'll the promise that we see with this is that a lot of the way credits are calculated today without using satellite observation requires relying on a number of assumptions that can often prove faulty. And if you've been following this space, you've seen those examples of overcrediting. And so what we're really trying to do is figure out not just technically bringing in the satellite observations to accelerate and scale, but also to improve the integrity and the quality of the crediting itself. And then quickly on me, I'm a background in satellite remote sensing. I was on the JEDI science team measuring trees from space and had previously worked in the carbon markets for Blue Source. And so I'm familiar with the current methodologies, the way markets currently issue credits.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for those intros. I'm first going to ask a question on current state and your vision on the future of MRV for terrestrial biomass. My point of view is that now carbon markets are, and especially all those related to nature-based solutions, are under a lot of criticism, and a lot of people see MRV as kind of the holy grail, right? The thing that has the power to actually change this and correct a lot of the faults of that market. So curious to get your views on that current state and the trends toward the future. What are the main issues to be solved? We can also start whoever wants to start first.
I'm happy to jump in actually and I'm speaking now specifically to forest carbon. And I think you're alluding to the fact that we've got examples of overcrediting in the market. I think it's also important to keep as context the size of the market right now is not relevant to the actual scale of the climate problem. So if you assumed all the credits issued today on the main registries were of quality, they still only account for about less than a few tenths of a % of current annual carbon emissions. And so the market needs to scale vastly in order to actually make any difference from a climate perspective. Why is that the case? It's largely the way things are currently done. And I'm not sure, maybe I'm going over well-trodden ground, but for those who aren't familiar, I mean, the way things work today, at least in the forest carbon market, you're only using plot-based inventories. So you have to send people out into traipsing around the field to measure trees by hand. Those numbers, those measurements come back in an Excel spreadsheet. All of the calculations of the crediting are then done in these massive sprawling Excel spreadsheets that essentially have to follow these very convoluted 100-page PDF documents. And those are then manually audited themselves. And so I'll turn over to the others. I don't want to get into like where we see the future going, but the first thing is resolving that. What does that really mean, resolving? For us, it's really 4 high areas of enhancing core attributes of the market that it needs to have. One is high integrity crediting, so increasing the integrity of crediting. Second is transparency that was mentioned earlier. Then the standardization, the way, when I mentioned about sort of calculation in Excel spreadsheet and the way market rules are currently defined, there's a lot of latitude and discretion for projects to do project by project calculation. So if you were to give the same data in the same rule set to 2 different people, it doesn't mean that you'll get the same issuance, even if people are not trying to do any particular gaming. And so there's a need for standardization to ensure fungibility in the asset itself. And then finally, scalability that I alluded to earlier. We need to scale by at least 100x if we're going to make some sort of dent in the piece of the pie for the climate solution. So I'll turn it over to others.
I think dovetailing off of that point around scale, you have these things these 2 aspects that are fundamentally sort of in conflict or in tension with each other right now, right? One is the need to vastly increase the amount of credits that are being supplied in the market and scale up the ease of developing a forest carbon project, because both Pachama and the Living Carbon team know it is exceptionally hard to do. Probably the thing that as a CEO, I underestimated the most in terms of how much historical knowledge would be needed and knowledge from existing folks that have worked in the registries. So you have the need to scale, but also the need for fungibility and the need to actually create a security and have this be a very robust, credible market. And those things don't have to be in conflict, but right now, I think because of the supremacy of some of these registries, you run into a lot of challenges where to be able to develop a carbon project, it takes years. And it's just because, and you might have the trees, you might have the land, but the biggest blocker is actually on the administration of the project and the MRV, which is a bummer, because if we ever want to get to gigaton scale, that has to be unblocked, that has to be made easier.
Sure, I totally agree, Maddie. And just to add to that, if we are going to reach the scale that we need, one of the challenges that we're seeing at Planboo as well is inclusivity of MRV. So when we're designing these tools and using these technologies, who are they being designed for? With a view to bringing trust and credibility to buyers, 100%, but also it's the people on the ground, at least in the areas that we're working in Planboo, in tropical regions. So when we're talking about terrestrial biomass, tropical regions are the most abundant areas of the world where there is the most biomass available. But traditionally, they've been left out of CDR solutions. A lot of the CDR we're seeing is happening in the global north. In tropical regions, we're seeing a huge opportunity, but not so much inclusivity. So this is where we think MRV has a big challenge, but also a big opportunity. If we can design these tools that on the one hand brings trust to the likes of Klarna, Shopify, these big buyers, but also are easy to use and inclusive for the stewards of the land in tropical regions, I think that's also going to help us get to the scale that we need.
And to add to that, what Priya's saying, like inclusivity isn't just about the day-to-day operations of the MRV. It's actually the whole process. When you're looking at a biochar project and a CDR project, to register with these standards, traditionally it's been a very detailed written report, 200 pages and potentially a $25,000 price tag to register your project. That excludes so many parties, landowners in the tropics. So it's super important to make the feasibility of these projects, the feasibility tools, they need to be affordable, they need to be engaging, and they need to be accessed through mobile technology, because not everybody has the ability to communicate 200-page report on their project and how effective it's going to be for CDR. But what people do have is the knowledge and the evidence around them. Oh yes, we do have biomass and we do have land and we do have a kiln. So if we can make that process as easy as possible so that people can actually start registering projects quickly and not waiting months for a response from the standards, but getting them online as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible, I think is going to unlock gigatons of carbon removal in the tropics.
Cool. Thank you for the wide variety of insights here. I now want to get to a few questions around some hot topics that the audience has asked us in the registrations. So a lot of people asked about accuracy and quantification, like how accurate is this? How are we able to actually measure with what accuracy, and is that important? So maybe Carlos, to start off with more the technical side, and feel free to go into all the details that you want. Explain us how is it done today, and what are some high quality MRV methods that can improve that quality?
Yeah, so I was alluding earlier to about satellite observation is scaling, but I also mentioned about increasing quality. And so if we go to the question of baselines or additionality, and I'm assuming the audience is familiar with those terms, the way most registries work today, there's variation, but some essentially assume a profit maximizing landowner. Others will allow you to manually select a control area on the landscape against which you compare, and often you're comparing against past deforestation and making a projection in the future. And so one of the things that we've developed at Pachama that we're still hoping to release results in the coming months, but is essentially adopting what you would do for any pharmaceutical trial or any sort of policy experiment where you're trying to quantify the impact of a public policy intervention. So in this case, it's having a control area, having a control group you have to test, for example, the efficacy of a COVID vaccine. So what we do with having a satellite view of the landscape, we can say, look, here is a carbon project. It has a range of features. We can talk about topography. We can talk about the height of the trees, the biomass of the trees. We can talk about distance to roads, distance to the nearest recent deforestation, all sorts of things we can observe from satellites. And then we can match on a pixel level up to control areas, and then just observe on an annual basis what's happening in these control areas. So that's one sort of specific solution that's available. I can talk later about MRV specifically, about then validation and auditing by an independent third party, but I'll let others respond first.
Curious to hear as well how, moving away from the forest and to biochar, how is biochar projects quantified?
I think we're in a very fortunate CDR space with biochar. It's a very much a physical asset that you can see and you can weigh and you can measure the volume of it, which then makes it a little bit more easy to measure, and for people to understand. It's very tangible, like when you see 1 ton of biochar on a scale, or in a 1 ton or in a 1 cubic meter bag. It's very real and easy for people to evidence. So then when it goes to actually taking the project and gathering this information, you can take biomass and you can record that, and you can walk around a field and you can plot out, okay, so how many trees or tons of cinnamon sticks are going to be harvested off this field, because we work with larger agricultural landowners in the tropics in particular, and they have 25-year cycles for their agricultural projects, so they know that every year they're harvesting 5 tons of cinnamon sticks, for example, from 1 hectare of cinnamon. So by working very closely with these projects, we can understand and we can map into their process, and then we have evidence to show that, okay, this amount of biomass is coming from here. When it lands in a kiln for biochar pyrolysis, we've developed a 2-step independent verification process, so that we have a smartphone application which makes it easier for the farmer or for the biochar producer to engage with, and an independent control device that sits with the kiln, and that records biochar production, so that we can sit back and we can see that, okay, the evidence and the information that's provided by the biochar producer and the independent device, these two match up. So then we have certification, okay, biochar is actually being produced within this project. And then when it's taken from the biochar kiln and it's mixed with compost, because we're really encouraging, this carbon's a great asset, for the planet. Yes, there's too much in the atmosphere right now, but it's a great ingredient for soil, and it's a great ingredient, for plants and for food. So we encourage these landowners to mix it with compost and organic fertilizers, so that when it goes into the soil, it's really giving its most benefit. And this is evidenced as well through smartphone devices, photographs, etc., so that people can really see that there's a tangible amount of carbon removal taking place, because that also makes it interesting for the buyers of the carbon credit. They can really see and visualize, okay, this carbon removal and this biochar has actually gone somewhere in the world, which then makes it easier as well for the third-party verification. They can go and check, and they can check in the fields, okay, where is this biochar? Oh, well, there it is. I can actually see it. It lasts in the ground for 1,000 years, so it becomes an easier thing for auditing. But yeah, that was quite a long answer.
Bit in one of the audience was the time aspect. So I also want to ask you about how long are the projects of biochar, and then how long does MRV need to be verifying in order for that to be like good high quality MRV. We can do first biochar, and then we move to forests with the same question on time. So so just to clarify, I'm asking first either Priya or Freddie about the time aspect of the project. So what is the standard length of the projects to ensure, and how long does the MRV need to be measuring for in order for this to be efficient?
Sure, so I can start, and then Fred, feel free if there's anything else. But so first, with the methodology that we've written for these large landowners in tropical regions to be compliant, the CSI, the European Biochar Certificate Standard, for us it's important that we measure from the point from harvesting of biomass, so we know exactly where it is and what type of biomass it is, to ensure, well, additionality, but also just high quality and high integrity. And we track this biochar production from that stage, from biomass going into the kiln, out of the kiln, being mixed and applied to the soil. And it's that data that is required for us to actually produce the quality carbon credits that we are. So I'd say in terms of the MRV lifespan, it's from biomass in and biochar into the soil.
Correct.
And to add that, it's also forever, like until we've solved climate change. Like this MRV like needs to be there every day. Well, it's used every day by the producers, so that we show that forever, for the entire duration of the project, which should be up until probably 2100 if we get our act together, then then our MRV is going to be used for till then.
What about forest? I know time is a hot topic in forest. So Maddie or Carlos, how does timing and MRV work for forest?
So for us, it depends on the project type. So whether or not there's any anticipated harvest. Otherwise, our ARR projects, or our afforestation of degraded land, generally about a 100-year time horizon. However, some of the more durable wood products, which is only a portion of the carbon from the IFM projects that we do, would end up being for a longer period of time based off of agreements we have with the landowner to only use the trees for saw timber. But I've got a little bit of a question for Carlos. One of the things that is kind of frustrating to me, but maybe is a justified concern on the part of the buyers, is, beyond just putting the trees in a land trust, I find it incredibly hard to quantify what the world is exactly going to look like in 100 years. Right. You, of course, factor in a risk of reversal in your MRV or in your methodology, and you plant in specific areas looking at, projected rainfall in 40 years and fire risk and everything there. But when folks try to ensure that we have a high degree of certainty of what the world is going to look like, I'm like, come on, like we can't address this sort of like nebulous fear of the fact that we can't predict the future. But I'm curious, maybe Carlos, if Pachama has had an easier time quantifying that in a way that resonates with buyers when you need to have a project that will extend for hundreds of years, but you're still storing the carbon in a bioavailable form.
Yeah, no, it's a thorny problem, and the points mentioned before are spot on. I think Freddie's absolutely right about what you're suggesting. We want, in principle, you want permanent, and so at least 100 years. There's this balance when you're talking then about, can you find sufficient landowners who are willing to, like, unless it's land trust at scale, commit their land over that time horizon. And so we still haven't solved this problem, but what the kind of thing that kind of the zeitgeist that people I think are moving to would be that you can, in principle, we expect to have satellite observation continually. So we can commit to indefinite, permanent observation to identify that problem you talked about. We planted all these trees. Have they all been burned down or come and cut them down in 70 years from now? Then there's the question of, if you really want to then, so now we've observed that, we can determine have we had that unintended loss. Then it gets to the point is, can we either with legal contracts or in some other way actually prevent that? And so there is thinking, I mean, very preliminary. I'm not saying there's anything Pachama's talking, but you could envision, I don't know what the risk profile would be working out in terms of, not having the whole thing collapse in the longer run, but you'd say, look, we can offset any losses as you do in the near term with a leak, like a buffer pool, right? And so you could think of a sort of a much longer term buffer pool. But again, that intergenerational thing becomes a little more complicated. But short answer is, we do want to commit to indefinite observation, and we would never, at least as Pachama, we wouldn't consider less than 30-year like a legal contract on a landscape. But the ideal would be 100 to indefinite.
I have another question. Sorry, I think my internet sometimes is a bit slow. Another question for the forest folks. I think we cannot talk about terrestrial biomass MRV without talking about additionality. So what are your thoughts on additionality and the way that it should be best addressed? I think relevant for forests, so that's why I'll ask it to Maddie and Carlos.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can think about additionality at various points within a project's life cycle. So for us, additionality means a couple things. Like, one, we're not pulling from existing tree supply, right? Our reforestation projects all come from our own supply chain, which is being added on to the existing seedling supply. So from a first principles perspective, you're applying additional trees. But then when it comes to the actual methodology, of course, there's looking at trying to play out what the counterfactual is, the financial additionality. And that's why working on degraded land is such an interesting concept, because the other use cases for our land are like, World War II reenactments or ATVs. And I guess that's also tying into leakage, but then when it comes to additionality of the carbon that's sequestered, in our lab, we have a very rigorous, even more rigorous than the methodologies, sort of burden of proof from a plant biology perspective, right? Which is doing controlled experiments, growing the trees to be 25, 30 feet tall, harvesting biomass, doing a large biomass decomposition assay, and then comparing that to control trees, right? And seeing, compared to the photosynthesis enhanced trees, how are our control trees performing? We would love to be in a world where it was super easy to quantify reforestation projects using satellite imagery. I hope that Pachama will have the ability to do that when the trees are really small soon, or something like that. Maybe you all already do, but it is challenging to automate. But from an additionality perspective, I think in conversations with buyers, there's the qualitative things that you talk through and how you frame your project. But I think for us, the counterfactual is pretty easy to play out, since we're not focused on existing forest stands or deferring harvest.
Any final thoughts on additionality, Carlos? Otherwise, we'll go to a final question.
I'll just make some high-level comments and noting a comment I just saw in the chat. So I just want to draw sort of, distinction between project level crediting and jurisdiction level crediting. What I was describing earlier about these control areas was at the level of having a project and then comparing to some other area. The jurisdiction is crediting just for actual observed reduction within a political boundary, like let's say Canada or the US, right? And so you're just saying, hey, you lost 100 units of forest last year. We want to see you drop down. If you drop to 90, you get 10 credits, right? In principle, there's not a policy regime for doing this. You could effectively scale to have a global baseline. So you just said global deforestation was X, and so you wouldn't have any counterfactual. You would just be actually buying observed reductions in carbon. So I just want to kind of highlight some of these sort of different how additionality is slightly different across these different types of markets. And the other thing, just going back to that project level, when I was talking to about the control area being one approach to additionality, one of the things that we do also is to quantify uncertainty in that baseline is we can take what we call placebos or pseudo projects, and we can match them to control areas. Effectively, you're testing the fundamental underlying hypothesis of any kind of treatment control approach. If there were no treatment, if you didn't give the COVID vaccine to the treatment group, you would expect the health outcomes to be the same for the treatment and control. In this case, by throwing lots of random projects down in the landscape and finding control areas for them, we can say, how accurate is our baseline? When there actually wasn't a carbon project, how well did the control area match up? And so there are ways, I'm just sort of getting at the market, there are ways to more empirically and algorithmically look at additionality that I think that get away from just sort of interpretations.
Great, thank you so much. I'm gonna ask a last question, and then I'm gonna turn it to the audience. There's a lot of questions in the chat, and would love if some folks would unmute themselves and ask their questions live. It's always nicer. So my last question, actually, quite related to this that you were talking now, Carlos, and what you were actually mentioning before about standardizing, right? So question is about scaling MRV and actually influencing the broader legacy system of carbon credits. So I'm thinking about the registries, Verra, gold standard, so on and so forth. How can better MRV methods be scaled and standardized across all standards? So what does it take? What do we need to do in order to get to that and influence those stakeholders, if you believe that's the way to go? And this is a question for everyone. I think it's
Go ahead.
Scaling MRV is important for both forest and yes. So start.
I can talk about this a little bit. So regarding legacy, so like Verra is an example of a legacy carbon standard. Our method, like they've just developed a biochar methodology that requires an MRV, and we've just developed an MRV for the EBC. Like there's only so much, well, I say there's only so much data. There is very certain data points that you can gather within a biochar project. As we've been able to do it with the EBC, we should be able to do it with Verra, and they should be able to adapt their methodology to include the more updated digital MRV tools. I know that they have just recently brought this out, and they include Carbon Futures MRV as an example, that they are willing to adapt these new methodologies to include the latest and greatest technologies. So I think that we need to get more of these MRV tools into like a number of different standards because they gather essential information for the project. So we shouldn't just accept that this is MRV for this standard and then that's it, and we'll close the book for the next 5 years and that's it. I think there's always a room for improvement, there's always room for betterment, and I think the standards need to be reactive to this so that they are including like the latest and greatest technologies in the data recording. But yeah, they're big organizations, they're slower to make, potentially a little bit slower to make decisions, and we're in conversation with Verra to try and get our our MRV included in there, but it is a slower process. So yeah, let's crack on.
I'd love to add to that as well, because the standards have a key role here, obviously, but also the projects do. We're the ones that have the power. If we're developing these MRVs, then we're the ones who kind of the spokespersons on behalf of the the people on the ground that are doing the work. So for us, data is key. By developing these projects and also developing the MRV solutions, we're collecting a lot of information. And that was actually how we ended up having our methodology approved, is that we didn't fit the standard of the EBC. So we developed our own methodology, and now it's available and to be shared with the world and with the other tropical regions and other projects. And I think that showed us that collaboration is key here. If the standards are going to be agile and adaptable, then projects need to come together by sharing this kind of data. So yeah, that's what I'm hoping that we can keep doing.
Very different landscape for forest, I guess. It's not about creating a new methodology, but about modifying it. What are your insights here, Maddie and Carlos?
Go ahead, Maddie, or okay. I'll describe kind of vision where I think the ideal, optimal, where we need to get. And the comments before, it's hard to get things moving in that direction, but idea if we can kind of have consensus around where we need to get. So the first thing to say is the way the market works today is validating inputs rather than outputs. So what that means is looking at all these Excel spreadsheets and making sure you follow the rules exactly as specified in a long PDF document. The problem is that once you want to bring satellite observation in, for all the reasons I mentioned before, the advantages, there's no way you're going to have explicit technical guidance around pre-processing algorithms for radar, right, for detecting forest biomass, or are using deep learning or shallow learning, all sorts of algorithm choices, methodological choices around machine learning. And so what needs to be done from my view is the shift to validating output. So what is a carbon credit? If we go back to the beginning, at least for forest carbon, it's emissions in the project minus emissions in the baseline. Right, we can talk about leakage a bit later, but so emissions, at the minimum, we need a carbon map, we need a deforestation map, we need a baseline. And so you can hold, what we see is the way to simplify validation is to have an independent third party that holds a database, for example, of plot or airborne ground truth biomass measurements. There actually are NASA, ESA academic efforts underway to have such a database. The same thing is standard in sort of all sorts of computer vision, machine algorithm, what I want to say is validation of machine learning algorithms, right? So manually annotated deforestation. You can have a simple global database that says, here's manually annotated detected deforestation. How well does Pachama's algorithm perform against that? And then I mentioned the baselines and the placebos, the pseudo projects. You could have an entity that holds these pseudo projects against which we would validate the baseline uncertainty. So for the three core crediting quantities and to get to credit issuance, you don't have to specify anything on the input side. You can have everyone comparing to a standardized, independently held data set that then also allows for adjustment against that, for any biases that would ensure that, essentially enhancing fungibility. So that's where we need to get to, but that implies a complete change in the way things are done, and obviously implies a lot of kind of collaborative effort to put together such a database and have an entity that can curate it, et cetera.
I think from a high-level government structure or overall system, I think to get to a place that Carlos described where we are evaluating outputs, I think we'll have to see more consolidation or some sort of system where you have the government procuring carbon credits or doing something similar to what's defined in the IRA and with DAC, and then more independent VVBs that might have more specific expertise in the area that you are working in. And those acting as the verifiers and having like a white, and some like, I think this is pretty common within the energy space, right? And it's less about the specific registry methodology itself, but more about validating the outputs based off of a source of truth. I don't know what that will look like or what the path is to actually get there, but I hope it happens soon.
Thank you so much for the insights. Now we're going to turn it to the audience questions. We have a lot of them, so I'm going to ask people we would love to, if you could unmute yourselves. So in order to do that, it's better if you can like raise your hand on Zoom so that we can see you. But I have a couple in the line. So I think Matt Schmidt, you have a question for one of our panelists. If you could unmute yourself, would love to hear. And if not, I think Lucy Buchan, I see you here. You can also unmute yourself and ask your question.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think I threw a couple things out there, but the question that Jason had prompted me to follow up on here is whether any of these companies or others in the same space are considering not just looking at the carbon credits, but starting to rigorously integrate accounting for co-benefits or ecosystem services. I've been looking into this space, and what I often see is that, you know, folks may say, well, we're reporting out on how they are addressing UN sustainability goals. But, you know, my background as an applied ecologist is I came from developing frameworks and doing lots of modeling and assessment in a watershed context and evaluating, you know, what are the ecosystem services, you know, looking at from that ecological perspective. So yeah, you're dealing with messy systems, but you can detect signals. And so you can take that kind of an approach and you can integrate it with carbon. Then you have a more comprehensive approach. And that is one way of identifying high quality carbon credits. Yes, it may not address the permanence. Carbon may not be stored for 1,000 years when you're evaluating those kinds of carbon credits in that context. And, you know, you may not have that kind of long-term certainty for some of these, how long the conditions that you're evaluating for these ecosystem services will be there. But it is a way to look at, you know, we all know that like the soil is like a sponge. And so when it's spongier, you get more carbon sequestration. But when all you do is evaluate carbon by itself, you disconnect it from that context, which is so important to evaluate carbon sequestration, right? So I think it's the way that we need to go. And it's messier than just trying to look at carbon. But anyway, I'll stop myself there and open up to the panel to respond.
Yeah, Lucia, thank you for that point, for raising it. All too often we focus on carbon markets, and they're actually sitting within a nature market, which us at Planboo, we found that whole concept quite problematic when we started this, you know, just the fact that we're calling it a market. But what we've realized over the last few years is that we have an opportunity here to move it from being an extractive market to a regenerative one. And yeah, so even the term co-benefits, I think, is problematic because it tends to be an add-on. But for us, looking at the benefits to the people on this planet is integral, and it doesn't stop only there at carbon. So working with soil scientists and master's and bachelor students here with our projects to actually be tracking what happens to the soil after the biochar goes in, right, in terms of the structure of it and its fertility and crop yields and things like that. So that is things that we're working on, and we want to actually have some kind of catalog. We've got this data about soil. Soil is different in every single region and every single country in the world. But by collecting this information, we want to have basically a hub of knowledge where it's the landowners and the farmers on the ground that know their soil like the back of their hand. And so what we're trying to do is integrate that into the MRV. And as you say, it's messy. We need to get the MRV going first and foremost and get buyers buying the credits and getting more biochar projects going, because essentially that's how we're funding this whole thing. But with that, having it as kind of integral to the business and the best practices that we want to incorporate, over the near future, we see embedding a lot more co-benefits, as you call them, into what we're doing.
Any thoughts on co-benefits from the forest side, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think co-benefits are a big part of how we talk to buyers about the projects that we're working on, specifically from a remediation perspective, and being able to also increase the overall quality of the land in areas where we've had some sort of fossil fuel or metal extraction. And a lot of our projects are in the Appalachia region, as well as the southeastern United States. So I think also making sure that you have like not just boots on the ground from your own organization, but are working with folks that are experts in that specific region that you're working with. And there are a lot of economic co-benefits there too. So working with planting crews that have planted specifically on the land type that you're planting on, and consulting foresters locally as well. That's something that is really integral to our projects and are aligned with the incentives that we have for ensuring a high degree of survivability on those afforestation and reforestation projects. A couple of people have asked me, because I think I spoke quickly at the beginning, but the company is Living Carbon.
If we have time just to add an additional point to Priya's regarding co-benefits and like looking at the soil, obviously is a big part of improving the is a genuine co-benefit, but like these projects are global and they're in the ones we focus on in the tropics, and like the social benefits that we can generate through this carbon financing like is tremendous. Like and this is a great opportunity to sort of break down those borders and connect people from different parts of the world to each other, so that people can, like, this carbon finance shouldn't just be landing in the global north. Like it really needs to like have the catalytic impact that it can achieve by ensuring that people are paid a fair wage on the plan, like on the different projects in different locations. So yeah, having an MRV that talks to all these different like key criteria that isn't just about carbon, I think is really important to make sure that this carbon removal market that everyone's very excited about like does actually achieve like a global shift in the way that we redistribute wealth. Because right now I don't think that if we're just solving it in the global north, we're going to solve a global problem, because we're forgetting about a big part of the world here. So I think that I think it's a very important thing and really a really key value of what we're trying to stress with how we're building our business. So yeah.
And Lucy, given your background, like we'd love to speak to you after this event and get some more insight and share more about what we're doing and learn from you as well.
I'll be sharing the panelists and speakers' emails at the tail end as well, so you'll have that.
Awesome. Marshall, please unmute yourself.
A great panel, love it. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Monica, for bringing these people to the table. It's been needed for quite a long time. As the previous co-chair of Working Group 3 for the cost action on biochar, I knew that we used statistical analysis known as longitudinal analysis, and I want to know if any of the panelists are familiar with that technique and that methodology for measuring carbon sequestration and other sequestration issues, and if so, are you currently using it? And that's my question for now. Thanks.
Hi. Longitudinal analysis, like that's, to be honest, I'll put my hands up and say that is not a term that I've come across specifically within our projects or within our methodologies to date. But please share some insight and some more information. I'll drop my email in the chat, and please, I'd love to be informed. It sounds something we should be aware of. Thanks.
I think we also have a question from Matt Curley. I think you're going to unmute your.
Yep. Thanks. Can you hear me? Great. And thanks again to the panelists. What I was wondering about was for biomass-based carbon removal, how are providers thinking about like explicitly temporary removals as opposed to trying to improve the permanence of the biomass storage? So like contracting for 10, 20, 30 years, and then replacing the credit with a different biomass removal or a permanent removal, or renewing the current removal. Wondering your thoughts about that.
I think there's a world where we start to see durability-based pricing. We already are, but to have that formalized a bit more, as well as quality-based pricing from a per ton level. On the buy side, we do see more and more people wanting 100,000-year permanence. We frame it as, you know, the benefit of biology trees in particular, of course, is the scalability and the ability to move very quickly in terms of using existing infrastructure to scale up to do a larger amount of gigatons than it takes to do DAC. And we talk about the projects that are in our R&D pipeline that are more focused on addressing decomposition and preventing the decomposition of either carbon stored in woody biomass, or we do some early stage work on increasing the increasing the expression of highly durable biopolymers that are found in some algae and some trees. And so we haven't actually stacked the credits on top of each other yet for 1,000-year permanence, but we talk about how we're doing research on 1,000-year permanence biology-based solutions, which is very challenging, right? Like that just doesn't really, outside of biochar, there's nothing else that can get you there. So yeah, I hope that people start to value scale in addition to durability as well when it comes to the purchases that they make.
Yeah, it was a great question. I'll say, you know, Pachama is very much committed to long-term sequestration and essentially permanent monitoring. The reason for that is that obviously crediting itself is hard enough to get right. And the scale people are talking about, if we get to a market of hundreds of millions of billions of dollars, it's very, very, we run the risk of this whole thing collapsing. And so we're really trying to be rigorous and precise in our issuance. And what you add on when you add the temporary element, you add essentially, it's a time value for money. If those familiar with economics, it's, you know, discount rates. You add a whole bunch of other assumptions, because all you're essentially doing is saying, I'm not stopping climate change, or I'm just delaying it by 10 years, right? And so you add a whole bunch of, and then, you know, if your suggestion about then like paying off with subsequent ones, you know, you obviously run the risk of a kind of pyramid scheme thing where you're like, I'm taking in to pay off the past one. And so, you know, I think it's a very, very risky endeavor to undertake anything like that. And so we are, at least Pachama is focused on long-term removal.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Marnie led from the audience for the biochar panelists, asking about, can anyone speak to the differences between Vera's or Pura's approach and your own approach in biochar project? Is either considered better, and by what activity?
I can address this question. So just basically, like Puro up to now has been very much focused on these large high-tech kilns that are really expensive, and the majority of them sit in the global north. So that methodology hasn't really suited tropical farmers up to now. Vera's also is rather similar, but I think there's real movement there, and potentially there's an opportunity, to start getting more of that methodology to suit these these tropical landowners. The EBC is only in the last year really that through like work with ourselves and Biochar Life that we, I guess, started helping and supporting like the EBC to recognize that there's a large amounts of projects and carbon removal like solutions that could be suited to that region, and that's where this methodology developed. So it's known as the Artisan Standard by the EBC. Those are the guidelines that they released after our methodology was approved. So those are really the differences, majority based around cost and technical engineered solutions versus more lower tech biochar solutions. I hope that answered the question.
Awesome. I think we're close to the end of the webinar. It's gone very fast. So before finishing off, I would love to give a chance for the panelists to say some last words or some words of advice. And I'd love to hear what is your key message for this audience, for especially addressing the entrepreneurs in the audience. What would be an advice for them regarding this topic?
But from my side, I'd like to say that there's no time like the present. So now is a time, a really pivotal time for people and technologies and all the ecologies to come together. And we've got a responsibility to do it and to do things differently. And it starts from within. So I'd recommend that. Go from within and see what's there. And then it's with that approach that we can build businesses better than they have been built before. And yeah, and go for it. Good luck.
Yeah, I can add to that, I think like so much of it is based on relationships. Actually understanding this new market, you learn so much from having conversations with people, whether they're farmers in Sri Lanka or other biochar startups in an air miners event. So like, I think building relationships, communicating, sharing ideas, working towards we shouldn't silo each other away and think we can solve it by ourselves, because that's not going to solve a global problem that we're all facing. Actually, we all need to communicate. We need to work together to try and we have solutions. Genuinely, I am so excited. It's given me so much genuine hope that we can actually solve this problem. So I think we should really galvanize that and everyone to recognize that these solutions do exist and we can move forward to solve them by working together collectively. Yep.
Think about MRV early in the development if you're working on carbon removal, because you might make a choice in terms of designing a project that will path commit you or make MRV more challenging later on. I think that I see a lot of nods. Also, a lot of people worry about funding or can I raise money for something that is a non-traditional tech company? The answer, if you have a compelling story and a big vision, is yes. I think if the group here is any evidence of that, hopefully that can help build confidence. Especially right now, a lot of the other spaces are seeing a bit of a decrease in interest, and that has not happened in climate. So we're very fortunate in that regard. Last thing, it's going to be a shameless plug. We're hiring for a lot of different roles, specifically around the MRV side of the business, and on our commercialization team. So if you have any interest, you can check it out on our website. And also, if you're building any tools around MRV related forestry type of technology, I'm very curious to talk to you. So.
I'll quickly add, just to be focused in what one is doing, and that not try to do everything. And what I mean by that is that we have to be very clear that the people who are buying these credits are continuing to emit carbon in the atmosphere. And so no amount of good intentions on our part can compensate for a non-rigorous computation of the crediting. And so one needs to very much focused on, how do I know what I know? How can I demonstrate it, validate it? And it might be great to include a whole bunch of other things in doing this to change but some of that might not be best done through a market mechanism. It might be public policy that would change other things. And so we're ultimately selling as carbon at the moment. And so we need to be able to defend that such that this market succeeds and does what we want it to do, as opposed to following the way of other markets that have tried to innovate and not done so successfully. So didn't mean to be a bummer there, but I just be positive about what we can do, but just don't try to do everything.
Yeah, that's great. Jason, I'll throw it back to you to wrap up.
Just want to say thank you, Monica. Thank you, Carlos, Freddie, Priya, and Maddie. This was a fantastic panel, and thank you to our audience as well. These are some remarkable questions, and We look forward to seeing you at our next event. I shared some links in the chat first for the speaker emails because unfortunately we weren't able to get to all the excellent inquiries that you all posted in the chat. So feel free to hit them up in email afterwards. Also, some links to our Launchpad Accelerator. If you are one of those one of those early stage startups that we just had some advice for in carbon removal, please apply to our next startup batch by February 10th. And a link to our Air Miners community and to our next event. Speaking of how not every single company can do it all, this is a burgeoning, growing ecosystem. The insurance industry is more and more important for carbon removal, for insuring projects, insuring delivery. And we're going to have some excellent speakers for that on Wednesday, January 25th. So we hope to see you there. And finally, we'd love to hear your advice on how we can improve our Air Miners events. What do we do well? What do we not do so well? And how can we make our community better? How can we make our events better? Love to hear that in the post event. Thank you again for coming, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thanks, everyone.